Okay, great. It's good to see the participants coming through there from the lobby, people finding themselves around the virtual conference venue. And thanks for joining us for session 1, which is on Ireland's cybersecurity opportunity, where we're going to discuss the current strengths of Ireland's cybersecurity cluster, but we're also looking at what's the potential growth and the opportunities for growing Ireland's cybersecurity industry. A couple of housekeeping, as I would have mentioned there previously, we have the Q&A function available. Please use this for your questions because we won't be able to monitor the chat as we're going, and it also allows the panelists to look at the questions. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. We had some interesting discussions coming through from the last session, so we'd like to use that as well. So to kick things off, I suppose, as we heard from the last session, you know, over the past 18 months, we've all seen how our lives have depended more on digital technologies than ever before. You know, the Minister was mentioning how, you know, we've moved to remote working, education has moved online, communications has all moved online now as well. And because of this, I suppose there's a greater demand for cybersecurity. And if we look at some of the stats, the global cybersecurity market value is projected to grow by 10% per annum between 2021 and 2028. I think it's about 180 billion, the global cybersecurity market at the moment, growing to 260 billion over the next 5 years. And then I suppose that's the opportunity that's out there. And then if we look at the national level and Ireland's cybersecurity sector, we've seen really strong growth over the past five years, and even going back 10 years. And as was mentioned, you know, we're a leading location for cybersecurity multinationals with 6 of the top 10 software security companies located here, a number of pure play cybersecurity companies. But outside of that, then there's also a growing number of multinational companies that have from across diverse sectors that would have their security operations centers based here in Ireland, product security teams and R&D teams as well. And interestingly, many of those multinational companies actually started in Ireland with an acquisition of an Irish company. And we've seen a number of acquisitions across the cybersecurity market and of Irish companies this year. Recent examples would be Adaptive Mobile and Ward Solutions, who we're going to hear about. And I suppose looking at that indigenous cybersecurity sector, there's a really strong base of companies there. There's over 60 that we've mapped out already that are exporting internationally. And there's a huge opportunity there for us to support and grow this indigenous cybersecurity sector. And I think what's of most interest, certainly for myself as well, is the emergence of this cybersecurity startup ecosystem and how we can support and facilitate and grow that. We've seen a number of cybersecurity startups attracting investment this year, the likes of Tynes, which we're going to hear more about, Gardu, more recently Vaultry, which provides encryption as a service. And so I suppose we know that there's a strong cybersecurity sector there. We know that it's growing. We know that there's a global cybersecurity market opportunity. But when we've actually looked at kind of the data for the cybersecurity sector, there's not a lot of good information out there. We don't know how many companies are here. We don't know the employment figures. We don't actually know what the opportunity for the market is in Ireland. So what we've done is commissioned a report funded by Enterprise Ireland to assess the Irish cybersecurity sector, to understand its contribution to the Irish economy, the potential for future growth, and it's important across all sectors of the economy as well. So today we are joined by Sam Donaldson, Director at Perspective Economics, who's going to present some initial findings from this research to date. After that, then we're going to turn this data into a couple of real life examples. We have a selection of successful cybersecurity companies with us today that are going to share different perspectives and their stories of development. So while I'm introducing Sam, we also have a quick quiz to test your cybersecurity sector knowledge. So Fiona, if you could launch that quiz for people there. There's 3 questions that you can answer, and we'll get the results of the quiz after Sam's presentation. So you should be able to answer each of those 3 poll questions, and we'll share the results afterwards. So to start off, we're going to hear from Sam. Perspective Economics are an economic advisory organisation operating in Ireland and the UK. They've led several cybersecurity research projects, including the UK Cybersecurity Sectoral Analysis. They publish that annually from 2017. They've done cybersecurity skills reports in the UK labour market, and Sam is leading the Irish Cybersecurity Sector report, and he's going to present to us now some preliminary findings from the full report that's going to be published in January of 2022. So thanks very much, Sam, for joining us. You should be able to share your screen with us now. Perfect.
Brilliant. So hopefully now you can all see this, and I'll just get started. So thank you very much, Eoin, for the introduction. Thanks for having me today. So I'm going to take just sort of 5-10 minutes to very quickly go through some of the initial findings from the research that we've been commissioned to lead by Cyber Ireland. Just to give you a sort of very quick breakdown then, we do intend to publish the study in early 2022, and the methodology that we're using is very similar to that has been used internationally. As Eoin says, we've led studies in the UK, we've led studies across Europe looking at the size and scale of cybersecurity sectors internationally. And what do we mean by that? So firstly, I mean, the three kind of ambitions of this research. Firstly, to identify the size and scale of the sector measured by the number of businesses that are actually offering cybersecurity related products and services. Trying to understand the revenue and the employment that's linked to that activity within Ireland. And then understanding things like the salaries that are paid within the country. What does that mean for productivity? What does that mean for investment? Secondly, then identifying what cybersecurity businesses in Ireland are actually providing to the market. And I'll talk a little bit about that in these slides, but again, really important to understand the strengths of the Irish market. So what are companies actually providing? What solutions do they have? Focused on professional services, on hardware security, on IoT. So trying to really get into the weeds as to what's being offered and what the strengths are within Ireland. And lastly, we also want this report to be quite an active report in showing what the market opportunities are for startups within Ireland, how we can attract new investments into Ireland, and ultimately provide recommendations to industry, to academia, and to government as to how best to shape the markets. And I know we'll discuss some of that within the panel. So just to give a very quick overview of what we sort of mean by the cybersecurity sector and how we want to define that, there are no official definitions in terms of economic statistics as to what constitutes a cybersecurity sector, simply because the definition can be quite varied. What we do with this research is we're taking a very broad definition, so really trying to identify any company that's working within Ireland that is focused on the protection of internet connected systems. So it includes hardware, software, associated infrastructure, data protection, and broader services to protect users from unauthorized access, harm, or misuse. And just on the right-hand side, this just gives a sort of a flavor of some of the companies that we would consider to be in scope that are operating within Ireland. And what's really striking to me and to the research initially is just the real breadth that exists in terms of the offering within the Irish economy. So you have a really good mix of really strong pure play, both international and indigenous companies, but also really a mix of companies across consultancy, across software development, across IoT security, across cyber physical systems. A really good, strong, diverse mix of players within the ecosystem that really do compete on an international level, and that's certainly unique that we've identified within the Irish study. Just give a very quick flavour of the methodology and how we kind of approach this study. As I said, this work is still underway, but firstly, we want to identify as many businesses in Ireland as we can offering and developing cybersecurity solutions. We've sought a definition of cybersecurity, and we have over 700 keywords linked to provision of cybersecurity within the market. We've been using extensive web data to identify potentially relevant companies and gone through those to verify those. And I'll talk about some of the figures, but we've verified almost 500 companies across the Irish ecosystem that are involved to some extent within either developing or producing cybersecurity products and services, or even having internal teams working on cybersecurity R&D. It was the second phase of this project. Many of the organisations on this call have taken part within the Cyber Ireland sectoral survey. that closed last month. So thank you for taking part in that, those who did. And we've received really rich data from over 100 businesses across Ireland as to what they do, what their ambitions are, how they're operating across the market. So that's all underway and will be published in early 2022. So to give you a real flavour of some of the early statistics, we've identified 493 businesses in Ireland offering cybersecurity products and services or with some form of cybersecurity capabilities. And of those, about 160 we estimate are pure play cybersecurity businesses. So essentially the focus of what they do is focused on cybersecurity provision. That's a really strong number, a really healthy number. And on the right-hand side, we've just mapped out where the sort of a best fit for where each of those companies sort of sits within the broader ecosystem. So about a third of the companies involved in managed security service provision and broader advisory services, 1 in 5 on securing applications, networks, cloud environments, but really strong figures as well on those developing internal cybersecurity R&D, working on risk compliance and fraud, which is again really important given the strengths of the Irish finance and banking sector. Threat intelligence, very strong, OT security, as well as identification, authentication, and access control. And just another figure to look at, we had tested some of the estimates about how many people are working within these companies in cybersecurity roles. And at the moment, we estimate there's about 7,500 to 8,000 people working in cybersecurity related roles within these businesses, which again is a really, really strong baseline to work from. Just to give a flavour then of company size, so I think this is something that Eoin touched upon, but it very much supported by the data. Ireland has, I guess, two main strengths going for it. On the one hand, you have a really large diverse mix of the large multinational companies investing in cybersecurity teams, and on the other, you have a number of high growth domestic cybersecurity firms. So 1 in 4 of the companies we've identified are large firms. So that means that they essentially have more than 250 staff. Just to give a comparison, the UK study that we did previously, we had about 1 in 10 companies were large. So that suggests that within Ireland, you do have a really good, strong cluster of large FDI cybersecurity operations which to draw upon, which is a really good thing for growing out employment and also creating opportunities further down the supply chain for SMEs. So significant opportunities to scale those operations, but significant opportunities across the board, really. Next, we also look at the location of companies across Ireland. So of those 493 businesses we identified, we've identified 730 separate offices across the island of Ireland. And I guess, there are 4 or 5 main hotspots that you would expect. In terms of the largest, in terms of the absolute number of companies, the vast majority of companies do have an operation in Dublin. But following on from that, one of the very interesting things we've noticed from this study is that over 130 businesses with a cybersecurity presence in Cork, which, if you look at that compared to the population of Cork, would suggest that there's a very, very concentrated cluster of cybersecurity activity in Cork, similar to with Galway, similar to with Limerick, and also really strong activity within Belfast. And I think that's really encouraging as well, and certainly one for the panel, because it suggests that really across the cities, across the island of Ireland, there are a number of very strong emergent cybersecurity clusters which to build upon, and a number of relative strengths and opportunities for each of those to kind of look and see where those strengths may lie. Next then, just talking about sort of where these companies are actually coming from. I've touched on that FDI point. What's very, very interesting is there's essentially a 50-50 split in terms of the companies we've identified between those that are Irish founded companies and SMEs and domestic firms that have grown, and 51% that are simply foreign owned or represent foreign direct investment into Ireland. And there are a number of domestic success stories as well. Really good to have Times and Word Solutions on the panel as well. Just to give a breakdown of the FDI investment into Ireland, 3 kind of main areas to look at. I mean, firstly, the importance of US FDI into the cybersecurity ecosystem in Ireland. So we've identified 141 American businesses operating in Ireland that have a cybersecurity presence, a cybersecurity team. And what's really striking about that is that whilst that only makes up about a third of the companies within the data set that we have, these firms collectively hire over 4,000 cybersecurity professionals in Ireland. So over half of the employment within the Irish cybersecurity ecosystem is coming from US FDI. So a really, really important striking finding there. And also then a really strong overlap between the United Kingdom and Ireland. So 61 UK businesses we've identified that are operating in Ireland and have that interplay, as well as the importance of the European market. And lastly, one of the other findings that's really, really critical within the survey that was held last month is that 80% of surveyed firms export or engage in global R&D. So a really outward-looking sector within Ireland, and a really, considerable international opportunity for the sector. So I'm just going to wrap this up. I'm just going to kind of give a couple of really key points that I think have come through the research so far. So firstly, a really strong cluster of almost 500 businesses engaged in cybersecurity products and services. And that has real wrap around to a number of sectors and applications. So it transcends not just pure play cybersecurity, but finance, healthcare, property, supply chains. Really has that implications, I think, across the Irish economy. That gives you a real opportunity to embed cybersecurity across sectors. And I think that's a really critical thing to be doing. 7,500 people working within these companies as of 2021. And if we talk about the growth trends and we look at how the sector has grown over the last sort of 4 or 5 years within Ireland, we personally believe that there is a potential here for Ireland to essentially double that employment figure by 2030. So potentially grow this figure to 15,000 people by 2030, and a really good sort of discussion to be had about how we can get there. 2 other key findings just from the survey, just to kind of wrap up. So firstly, 83% of the businesses that we had surveyed have indicated that they want to increase, or they do intend to increase, the employment of cybersecurity professionals in the next 12 months. So these companies are very much in growth mode. They want to secure talent and they want to bring new talent into their firms. However, there are 2 really large challenges that exist that have been reflected by the survey. Almost half of the businesses have told us within the survey that they experience a lack of suitable candidates, and 2 in 5 face significant competition for talent from other businesses. So broadly speaking, overall, I think there's real opportunity here. I'm really looking forward to the discussion as to how we get there. So I'm just going to stop sharing my slides and I'll pass back over to Eoin.
That's great, and thanks very much. Some interesting results coming back there. And if we can share maybe the results of the polls coming through, you can see there that actually a lot of people said that there was only 100 companies in Ireland's cybersecurity sector. We're finding now that it's actually nearly up to 500 companies. And the breakdown between Irish and foreign-owned companies, a lot of people voted for foreign companies there, but it's actually equal 50-50, but there's a high number of employees working in foreign-owned companies. And then finally, the regional distribution, I think what we've seen from Sam is that there's actually strong clusters across the country in Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick, and Belfast. And how can we look to support those regional clusters as well? So the big opportunity there is that there's potential to grow this sector to 15,000 jobs over the next 10 years. Companies in the security sector are already growing rapidly, but the big warning sign is we won't be able to do this unless we address the skills challenges that are out there for industry. To discuss these findings, first up, we're going to hear from Eoin Hinchy from CINC, a startup who's developed a software that allows employees to automate security workflows. This year, CINC have raised over 20 million euros in investment, making them one of the highest valued startup companies in Ireland. Eoin, previous to CINC, had spent over 10 years as a senior security operator with the likes of DocuSign, eBay, and Deloitte. So Eoin's going to join us to tell us a bit more about CINC and their startup journey. Thanks for joining us, Eoin.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So could you tell us a bit about CINC, the company, and where you developed the product from?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. So CINC is a little over 3.5 years old now, which is kind of hard to believe. I founded the company in 2018, having spent, like you said, about 10 to 12 years working as a security practitioner, primarily in fairly technical roles like incident response, security operations, security engineering, threat hunting, threat management, those type of roles in companies like eBay, PayPal, and DocuSign. But it was really while in DocuSign that I felt the need for a platform like Times. So I was running cybersecurity globally for the company, had a team of like 35 people spread across the world, and was responsible for everything that wasn't strictly compliance related. And my team were incredible security practitioners, really well paid, motivated, talented people, but they were spending more and more of their time doing the same kind of repetitive ops tasks, things like that most people will be familiar with here: running down phishing emails, responding to EDR alerts, updating tickets, triaging bug bounty, validating vuln scans, that type of work. And when we benchmarked it, we found that about 80% of my team's time was spent doing something that they'd already done that day, which is A, just heartbreaking as a people manager, but B, also just leads to like natural burnout and churn and so on. And so in about 2017, we started looking for tools that we could buy that would allow these people who knew their jobs inside out automate the repetitive manual tasks without having to write software. Because again, these folks were security practitioners and not software engineers. And although one or two of them probably could have written a bit of Python or a little bit of Bash here and there, we didn't want what were literally the company's most critical processes hanging off these scripts that were hard to manage, didn't scale, et cetera, et cetera. And so over the course of like 6 months, we evaluated like about a dozen different platforms, everything from big box shops like Cisco, Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, Splunk, all the way through to consumer products like Zapier and if this, then that. And long story short, we hated every single one. Like, couldn't believe how bad these tools were and how expensive they were and how far from our requirements they landed us. And so being the petulant Irish man that I am, I said, you know what, I can do a better job of this myself. And so founded Times in 2018, really with a vision and ambition no more grandiose than to build a platform I wished I could have bought when I ran security teams. And so today, we are now 60 people spread across Ireland and the US. We are, we've raised $40-ish million from world-leading investors like Index, who you'll know from like investments in Uber and Deliveroo and companies like that. Excel, who led Facebook's Series A, invested in CrowdStrike, Tenable, Sumo Logic, and companies like that. We're valued at $300 million, which I think places us as the highest private valued security startup in Ireland and one of the leading in Europe. We have companies that range from our customers that range everything from Fortune 5s to public and private SaaS companies like Box, Coinbase, Auth0, Informatica, Databricks, and even security companies like Know4 and Sophos, all the way through to startups all around the world. We also have about 2,000 to 3,000 companies using the free edition of our software. About 95% of our revenue comes from the US. So we've got a handful of customers who are in Ireland and the UK. And as a result, we service pretty much all those customers from here and our hub in Boston.
It's a really interesting story, and it's incredible how far you've come in only 3 years. I suppose it'd be interesting just even to get an idea of what are the types of roles that you have in the Irish operations here.
Yep. So all our leadership team is in Ireland. So everything from like our head of sales and marketing is in Ireland. Our head of customer success is in Ireland. Our head of design is in Ireland. Our head of engineering is in Ireland. We do all our development and R&D happens in Ireland, primarily in Dublin, but we've got folks scattered around like Cork and Galway and a few other places like that. We are probably going to grow, we'll probably be like 75-ish people by the end of this year, and probably close to 200 by the end of next year. The main kind of growth that we expect in terms of headcount is in primarily like go-to-market teams. So we have a bit of a bias towards small, hyper-efficient product and engineering teams, but we'll still double or triple that size of that team. So it's to answer your question, it's a little bit of everything, but all our research and development and all our executive team is in Ireland.
You know, you're talking about scaling the team rapidly over the next year, growing it to 200 people. How are you going to do that? Do you find it easy to attract talent into a startup company, or is it difficult to bring people in?
I think in this market, it's difficult for everybody. We've got a lot of things going for us that kind of give us an unfair advantage in that, like, we're a startup and people are generally attracted to startups. We've got a bunch of amazing customers that, like, people want to work for, and we're also, I think, you know, we're on in a bit of a trend at the minute around like cybersecurity and automation, and ensuring people are working on the tasks that most engage them. And so we've got an unfair advantage. We fight quite a bit for best talent. We've raised a lot of money to be able to kind of like go toe to toe with the likes of like Stripe and Netflix and Amazon. But it's absolutely difficult, but we're lucky that we have a great team, and we're currently one of the kind of like the main companies that people want to work for in Ireland.
Okay. I suppose you kind of mentioned there the plans for growth, you know, over the next year, but where do you see, I suppose, the potential growth for Tynes over the next 5 years, in terms of, you know, the markets that you're looking at, and the company's growth?
Yeah, great question. So we tend to keep a fairly short time horizon when we're thinking about projections, and not get too fixated on like the distant future. And 5 years time is the distant future in a startup. But like I said, we'll employ 200 people by the end of next year. We'll at least triple revenue this year. We'll triple revenue again next year. And then for the kind of preceding 3 years after that, so as in like 23, 24, and 25, our aim will be to double headcount and double revenue for each of those years. And we're certainly on target to do that. We will, I think the US will be our main market for the foreseeable future. That's where most of our customers are today. That being said, we do already have customers in APAC. We've got a bunch of customers in continental Europe. So we'll definitely double down on those in 2022. Broadly speaking, you know, we don't think about like an exit, right? We're not thinking, are we going to go public, or are we going to be acquired by like a big company like CrowdStrike or something like that? What we're doing is trying to build a business that can produce $100 million in revenue, like recurring. And I think once you focus on that, the rest kind of takes care of itself in many respects. I think we've got the potential to be the largest Irish software company of all time. And I don't think that's hubris. I think that if you look at the market opportunity, if you look at the traction that we have, if you look at the logos that are using our platform, if you look at our kind of KPIs across the business, we've got 100 NPS, our net revenue retention is up at 158%. All the indicators are there that, yeah, you know, we could definitely be, if not the largest Irish software company of all time, at least top 3. And that's the goal we're setting ourselves.
So you're scaling rapidly, big plans for growth. I suppose, what have been some of the challenges over the past couple of years? You know, for a lot of companies, COVID-19 has been a serious challenge, but I suppose, has there been any advantages to COVID-19 and how we work now as well?
Yeah. It's really hard to say. So we were 5 people when lockdown started last March, and we had just moved into a new office in Dublin, like 5 of us, and we were like, this is going to be amazing. And then we shut the door. And so we've onboarded, you know, like 90% of the company remotely. And so it's difficult to compare and contrast how we were doing before and after, because it's not really apples and apples. What I can say is that, you know, we have had no problems expanding our market share. One of the huge advantages that we've had is that, like, our main competitors are like Splunk, who are a $30 billion company, and Palo Alto Networks, who are a $60 billion company. And these folks have like extraordinarily efficient go-to-market teams who like fly around all the continental US visiting their customers. That, like, COVID-19 completely leveled the playing stakes there. And so it really became not just a battle of how good your sales team were, but much more a battle of like how good your product was. Because all of a sudden, it didn't matter if you were able to take the CISO out to lunch or bring the CISO to the Super Bowl, which we weren't able to do. It became a who's got the better product. And so we win 90% of the bake-offs that we're involved in, regardless of the competition. And so I think COVID has, and we win every technical evaluation that we're involved in as well. And so COVID has kind of given us a little bit of an unfair advantage, really, against some of our huge, primarily US competitors.
Okay. I have a kind of personal question as well that I'm wondering about. You know, you've a good job in a multinational company, managing an international security team, well paid, you might have a mortgage. You know, why do you take the risk to leave all of that behind and start up a company?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very fair question, and it's certainly the question I got most frequently, like, you know, 3.5 years ago when I was starting this company. And it would probably be fair to even like rephrase the question, go like, why on earth did you leave the company? Because like you said, I had a great job, great team, was earning like a ton of cash, and was really, really happy. And, you know, my next logical step in my career would have been to be the CISO of like one of those FDI companies that Sam was pointing to there. The reason I packed it all up to take on this massive risk and work unpaid for the first year by myself in Tynes was because I genuinely had a vision for how the world could work differently. And it wasn't a hugely different vision, right? It wasn't like, I think that we can solve world hunger. It was that I think security teams can work better and more efficient. And I think the worst thing that you can do as a founder or an entrepreneur is start a company to do what you love. Because it turns out you don't get to do what you love all that much, because you end up like working on tax returns and doing marketing and sales and so on. But, you know, I saw this massive gap in the market. I saw how overwhelmed and overburdened security teams were. And frankly, working in a security team like should be the best job in the world. Like, you get exposure to all these incredible like variety of technologies, cutting edge things. It's good guys versus bad guys. It should be just the best job in the world, but it's not. It's really hard. 33% of CISOs self-medicate. Like, think about that. That's insane. And so I had a vision that with Tynes, we could actually make the lives of security teams easier by helping them automate 99% of their manual work and allowing them engage in more thought-provoking, challenging, entertaining work, and kind of flip the balance of your day-to-day working in a security team. Yeah, that's kind of how I did it. But I still get asked that, like, even though by pretty much every measure, like, Tynes has been an overwhelming success, I still get asked, like, hey, why did you quit your great job? Which is kind of, you know, self-evident in itself.
Well, look, I think it's a fantastic example, and it's the kind of stories like these and other startups, cybersecurity startups, that we need to shout a bit louder about in Ireland and create more awareness around the success of what people have done to inspire others around the country and in schools and colleges as well. Thanks very much for that, Eoin. We're going to move on to our next speaker now, which is Pat Larkin, the CEO of Ward Solutions. Many of you will know Pat. Ward Solutions are a managed security service provider with customers in Ireland and the UK. And we're going to ask Pat just to tell us a bit about the Ward Solutions journey. An MSSP, an Irish company, was privately owned. You know, Pat, you've grown the business organically over, I think it's probably 2 decades now. And you had the recent announcement that you've been acquired by an Irish cloud solutions provider, Echo. And I suppose if you could just tell us about that story of how it's developed and the acquisition and what that means for the company's future growth plans.
Great, thanks, Eoin. I suppose in contrast to the story Eoin has just told, I suppose we've been probably a different approach to ultimately similar objectives. So Ward Solutions was founded by 3 guys who joined the army together back in 1984, and I was just noting with Emer, we're working in an office, her office in Ballincollig in Murphy Barracks in Ballincollig back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I suppose we followed the journey. We left public sector, we left the Defence Forces. We'd been working in IT in the Defence Forces and founded Ward Solutions. And it was in that really heady day of kind of, you know, pre-.com and then through the transition of .com mania, where I suppose you were chasing every unicorn. You were trying to figure out what digital business was, what cybersecurity was, and all of that sort of stuff. And I suppose we pursued not just the Ward Solutions business, but we probably had 3 or 4 startups that you know, we founded and took to various markets around that time frame. And ultimately then post.com collapse, we came back to, I suppose, what was a viable business that we probably hadn't given our love and attention to, and refocused on that around 2007 and 2008, and very much, you know, brought it back to being core focus of cybersecurity, organic growth, focused on the Irish and UK markets, as you say, and just evolution of kind of building that business rather than neglecting that business, which we did, and an MBO of one of the founders in around that time frame. And I suppose as we got it to a certain point in scale, we then sort of looked and said, well, look, around 2015, we need to do something different. We went out and sourced some consultancy for security and managed security businesses, which it seemed novel at the time, but actually was really foundational in terms of just changing our focus to optimize the business and get it through that kind of plateau onto the next size of business that it was. And we followed that path, which to Eoin's point, I think is, rather than focusing on an exit or rather than focusing on something, if you build a good solid business and you do the right things, then what happens is that the business looks after itself, and shareholder ambitions look after themselves as well. And we would have got involved in things like various programs through Enterprise Ireland and things like the Lean initiative and applying Lean principles to the business, which again was transformational, and a lot of support around that. And I suppose what you would have noticed from that phase on, then you were starting to spend a lot of time, not so much just growing your business, but also in, I suppose, what you would call bid defense in terms of lots of approaches from organizations to partner and work together. And then I think, a seminal moment again for the sector and for Ward Solutions as part of that sector was something like the coalescence of and the coherence of something like Cyber Ireland coming together to provide that sectoral focus and generate awareness of cyber in Ireland, and create that sort of messaging and start to potentially build policy around that was very seminal. And I suppose culminating obviously in I would suppose a seminal event for Ireland, which is obviously the HSE, the critical event that happened this year and really drove home the awareness of the need for cybersecurity services and that sort of stuff. And as you say, Eoin, that culminated then in us agreeing to be acquired by Echo, an Irish very successful story in its own right. And that allows us to go on to the next level of journey that we had in terms of doubling the business over the next 3-4 years and taking us to markets that I suppose we hadn't been in ourselves in terms of wider European markets, etc. So that's our story, I suppose, in a kind of 3-minute summary.
Perfect, thanks, Pat. I suppose just to pick up on one of the points there that you said, you utilised the Lean Business program there from Enterprise Ireland. You mentioned that you undertook some R&D, and I suppose it's interesting, it's unusual that maybe a service provider would engage in R&D. So I was just wondering, what type of R&D did you do? Was it of value to the company? And is there any other programs out there that you've utilized as well to support the business growth?
Yeah, I think as we focused and said, okay, we've reached a particular level in the business, how do we get to the next level? We had to make decisions that traditionally we probably hadn't done. Something like our services and our service catalog is really important, but we're not treating it the way maybe companies who build products would treat it. So we carved out one of the roles, Paul Hogan, one of our co-founders, as kind of that dedicated Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, and he then led a program in the business around focusing on our services and really trying to productize and standardize them and make them, very efficient, very market savvy and very market serving, and improving them and defocusing on some of our services that perhaps, weren't of value or weren't of scale. So that's part of the transition we did in 2015. And then that inevitably led to a kind of an R&D mindset to say, well, look, what is the opportunity? What's the service that we would need? How do we iterate that service to make it improve and refine, and ultimately serve the customer best and then serve the business best in terms of profitability. So a lot of focus there. We struggled, we were looking to try and collaborate with academic institutions, etc. around that stage, but we were struggling to find, I suppose, people who brought a kind of a service-oriented R&D mindset and methodology. So I suppose we had to try and generate it and iterate it ourselves. We found some intellectual property with some of our partners. Fortunately, one of our partners kind of ran a program that they had founded in the States that helps managed services business, kind of perform that R&D function. So we utilized a lot of that framework, a kind of a service factory approach. So I suppose we had to go and find the methodologies and the frameworks to try and use and adapt them then to IT services. And again, I think there's opportunity for particularly academic and research and development organizations in Ireland to participate with service providers in that. And it served us very well in terms of improving our services, making them more profitable, making them much more repeatable, and a much more standardized approach to service development.
I think it's an important point, and it's one that we're going to pick up in session 4 in the afternoon on how can we support an R&D ecosystem in Ireland within, I suppose, within industry, but also collaboration with academia as well. I suppose now that you have been acquired by Echo, what are the plans for growth for the coming years, and how will that, I suppose, allow the business to grow as well?
Yeah, the challenge for us was we reached a certain point in terms of our scale, and you know, you reach that plateau, which is then, okay, how do you double the business over the next 3 to 5 years? And our choice, I suppose, was that was not everything we've done to date has been organic. It was off our own cash flow, it was off our own resources. And you know, we weren't going to spend the next 20 years trying to double the business. We wanted to do that in 3 to 5 years. And our choice, I suppose, was either, I suppose, go on an acquisition route and, you know, bring in capital and funding to do that, or, you know, be part of something else who has the expertise to do that. And to Eoin's point, your challenge is you set out as an information security professional doing what you like, and suddenly you end up then, you know, being involved in financial engineering and fundraising and acquisition strategy and all of that sort of stuff. And if it isn't your core skill set, then obviously, you know, you have to bootstrap that process in the business as well. So we made a decision, the board, to say, well, that's route A, and route B then similarly is to participate with somebody. And I suppose in the bid defense strategies that we had then, quite quickly, as we were approached by Echo earlier this year, it became apparent that this would be route B for us, in the sense that it still could achieve our aspirations for the business, for our customers and for our staff. But you would do it with somebody who clearly had the expertise in terms, had the financial firepower to do it, and then had the expertise in terms of M&A. And ultimately they immediately launched, I mean, since our acquisition, we're now heavily involved in opportunities in the UK, in the Netherlands and continental Europe. And you know, something, haven't developed that before, you know, a new market entry, new market launch can be a 2-3 year exercise in its own right. Suddenly this is something that's happened, you know, practically overnight. And it's in partnership and concert with a lot of the acquisitions that Echo have made in the UK and in the Netherlands. The growth aspiration is still relatively modest. It's not crazy. It's we would have always set ourselves a goal of somewhere between 8 and 10% per annum organic growth. Again, what we like about this approach here is that, you know, it is to build a kind of a solid foundational business, and it is still aspirational around 8, 10, 12% growth, with the engine and the synergies that the Echo family, if you like, offer that opportunity. So our baby, if you like, Ward Solutions, can now achieve the growth safely with the financial firepower, with the in-presence markets that Echo now offers. And it can do it immediately without all of the disruption and hiatus that you kind of go through as you try and do this yourselves. So it seems to have been a very good fit for us in terms of the acquisition, and it allows us to achieve our objectives, and ultimately then we serve I suppose the Echo objectives as well. And you know what, the services that were in the Echo family are very complementary. You know, we're the first security pillar into the Echo Cloud business. We provide that capability, so it brings a lot of business to us. But similarly, there's lots of services in there, things like backup as a service, workspace as a service, private cloud. They're all services that I suppose we wouldn't have had the firepower to deliver or bring to our customers similarly, that are now in the stable. So you know, again, we can bring complementary services to our customers, and then we complement an awful lot of the customers that are already in the Echo stable European-wide.
And I suppose, Pat, we'd have a lot of SMEs participating in today's conference as well. And I'm sure some of them are thinking, you know, what makes a company like Echo acquire or buy a company like Ward Solutions? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, I think we're in a hot space. That's obviously attractive just generally. I think, to Eoin's first point, if you construct a well-run business, if the thing isn't a house of cards, if it's a well-run business, and whatever your time frame is, it has the right services, the right customer base, the right people. It's a services business. People are absolutely key to this at all levels in the business. and you're doing the right things, then I think that's naturally what makes you attractive and a fit. You have to get obviously the right chemistry. It has to be the right proposition for your acquirer or whoever you're going to acquire, and it has to deliver the synergistic value to both parties. So I think that's so cybersecurity is clearly very hot space. The compelling events that we've seen, not just here in Ireland, but obviously what's been happening internationally means that any IT service provider really now has to have an underpinning security capability in order to continue to deliver their IT services. So therefore you pick the right size, the right fit organization, the right chemistry and the right culture to fit your organization. And if you're doing the right things, I think that's what, it was notable since 2015. I suppose we were staving off probably 10 to 15 approaches a year, probably 2 to 3 of those pretty serious each year. I got my bid defense slide deck down to 2 slides, which was, this is what we do, but you already know that. And this is what we've rejected and why. And so that really crystallizes your conversation very quickly, and you don't spend time, wasting time kind of on a dance. We weren't looking for a sale, so at no point did we advertise our business as being for sale. We were perfectly happy to continue doing what we're doing for the next 5-10 years. We were getting enjoyment out of it. But I suppose we just saw the challenge, which is to double our business in the next 3 to 5 years. We had a choice, which was start an acquisition trail or become part of something bigger. And I think you just, once you look at that mindset then and cross that kind of Rubicon, if you like, then those choices are very simple. And route A is difficult and there's a long lead time to it. Route B, if you get the right fit, is really a much more attractive proposition.
Pat, congratulations on the Ward Solutions story today and your success. There's obviously no such thing as an overnight success. And best of luck with your plans for growth over the coming years as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan.
We're going to move on to our final speaker on the panel, which is Emer O'Neill, Director of Security Response Centre at VMware. And VMware has opened an office in Cork in 2005. It's expanded its workforce, I think, to over 1,000 people now. Emer, correct me if I'm wrong. And VMware, I suppose, is known for its cloud and virtualization services, but they also have a product security team in Cork. And I think we'd like to kind of discuss the potential for Ireland to attract security operations outside of the pure play cybersecurity companies. I think it's important also to mention that Emer is the chapter lead of the Cyber Ireland South chapter and has been doing some fantastic work with that group there as well. So Emer, if you'd like to kick things off with just telling us the story of how the product security team in VMware and Cork has developed over recent years.
Sure, thanks Eoin, and thanks for having me here today. So I suppose maybe just to kick off, I want to explain a little bit about my role. So in VMware, I lead the Security Response Centre. So this is a global team, and our responsibility is to respond to any externally known or externally reported vulnerabilities in VMware products and services. So the team is made up of primarily security engineers. So these are folks that are skilled in software dev, have a background in software development, and marry that with security. So in terms of team size, we've about 90 people in the security engineering team globally. I also look after the more proactive arm of the security teams, which is our SDL, Security Development Lifecycle, where we have a few folks in Ireland as well. And they're more focused on, I suppose, ensuring our products are secure pre-release. So doing items like security testing, pen testing, and vulnerability scanning. So that's just an overview of the team. So now I just want to kind of reflect upon the story of how we came about here in Ireland. So VMware Ireland historically has always been primarily a support organization. We have global support here, quite a big team in that 1,000 people that you mentioned. And then we had other functions such as HR, sales, finance, but never R&D. And that was something that the VMware Irish Council were, I suppose, working very hard to attract into Ireland over the years. And then about maybe just over 5 years ago, we became aware of an opportunity to bring in an R&D team here, which was the product security team. So at the time, I suppose, the product security function were primarily in the US and in India, and they wanted to have a global presence. So they wanted to come into the European market. They looked at one of our larger R&D sites in Eastern Europe, which is in Bulgaria, and were unsuccessful in finding the talent there. So Ireland, we stepped up and we said, okay, we worked closely with the IDA to understand, I suppose, what would the opportunity be in Ireland? What skills are here? What skills will be here in the future? And how could we fill this need for VMware to scale out its product security team? So what we did is we put together this proposal, working with IDA. So for grant aid, we did what's called a feasibility study, which is a kind of one-year study giving you a certain amount of grant aid for your employees to make it more attractive. And we were successful in acquiring that. And with this, we brought this back to our headquarters, and we presented it, and they said, okay, we'll give you 5 positions to begin with. And really, I suppose it was about testing the waters for VMware Ireland, right? Will they be successful in hiring into this real niche area? And does that give them then, do we then have an opportunity to further scale in R&D? So then the challenge came about to try and find the talent, and believe me, it wasn't easy. Even though we had looked at, and I had visited a lot of universities around Ireland and looked at what cohorts were coming out, we weren't finding local talent. So we had to look overseas, and we looked, I suppose, primarily at Western Europe. And we were successful in hiring a couple of senior security engineers from the likes of Portugal, Spain, and Italy, which was fantastic. So we brought them over to Ireland. And with that, we had seeded a kind of a strong foundation for the team. 3 to 5 being a small number, I know, but we just needed to kind of, as I said, prove that we were able to get the talent. So once we had that talent here, we were then able to look at how do we start to develop more of a pipeline. So looking at, for example, having a regular intern positions year over year so that we could start to develop that skill. And again, we came up short with Irish talent. We were successful in getting interns from French colleges, and we had 2 come in, and we converted them into security engineers as well, full-time positions. And at our peak, I suppose, for the product security team, we were at 12 people here, primarily made up of security engineers, and then some technical program managers as well. But because we continued to struggle to find talent, we wanted to look at other ways to build that talent pool. So what we did is we looked at our support organization here in Ireland, where we had a lot of people who had a software dev background. So, and some people who had a passion for security that may have engaged with us, for different customer requests over time. So we built a training program internally around OWASP Top 10 and your SANS Top 25 to try and develop that muscle within the organization. So if an opportunity came, that we could say, yes, we have a person ready to fill that role. And that proved to be quite successful. And we took 2 people on internally, transferred into the product security team. And happy to say that one of those people now is a senior security engineer in the team. So, really had a passion and worked hard, and came into that position. So I suppose in terms of growth, I mean, as I mentioned before, this was about testing the waters. And I know it's been a long time coming. 5 years seems like quite a significant amount of time. I think COVID might have slowed things down a little for us. But we're now attracting more roles into Ireland. Like, for example, we're starting a new offensive security team, which is going to be, the hub is going to be in Ireland. We have, for our cloud SRE, we've DevSecOps teams that are going to come into Ireland. And also just recently, we found out that our Carbon Black arm is going to look at Ireland for their threat intel and research. So this is, I anticipate growth over the next 2 to 3 years, which is very positive.
Thanks very much, Emer. There's a lot of opportunities there. I think that we all realise, but again, it comes back to ensuring that we have the homegrown cybersecurity talent here. You've mentioned that Ireland is an attractive place to bring in cybersecurity professionals from internationally, and Ireland certainly benefit from that across the IT sector. But I think throughout our conversations with industry, it keeps going back to the importance of skills and having that homegrown talent here. And from our cyber skills survey that we published this year, 43% of new hires are actually coming from outside of Ireland. 50% of cyber security teams were significantly understaffed or understaffed. And 20% of roles were taking 6 months or longer to fill those positions. So they're serious challenges that we need to be able to address to allow multinational companies and indigenous companies to be able to grow and reach their potential. I'm just wondering, you've talked about some of the growth plans there and the acquisition of Carbon Black as well. How are you going to be able to deal with those challenges and grow out the team? Do you have any specific initiatives that you're looking at for the future?
Sure. Yeah, one initiative we're looking at under the Cyber Ireland South chapter is some sort of collaboration with academia to develop maybe a graduate program. So to try and look at what skills and what's going on in some of the cohorts where we would hire from, and what more can, I suppose, industry add to these to equip the graduates coming out with the skills that we need. What's interesting is, as part of us scoping out this program, we did a bit of research around some of the South chapter members and what their plans were for in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years in terms of hiring graduates with a cyber background. And interestingly enough, we found that in the next year there's an opportunity for about 70 graduates in the South region with some sort of cyber skills. So there really is, we really need to be doing more. And I think through Cyber Ireland now and working with academia, I think we have an opportunity here. And that's something that we're starting to kind of form out, if you will, and see how that we can kind of maybe have guest speakers come from different organizations so that they can kind of build that skill set that we require. And one thing, actually, just an interesting point, we were successful, and which is a great news story for us. Or we had an intern from Ireland, from UCG, join VMware this year, who we've converted to an FD position for next year, coming out of a computer science cohort up there, that they do seem to be doing a lot around security as well. So slowly, we're starting to see more skills come out of the colleges, but there is more work to be done there, most certainly as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Emer, is talking about, when we move away from just looking at our own organizations and joining up the dots, we're talking that there's 70 cybersecurity graduate roles coming out of the south of the country every year. If we multiply that out, then if we could look at that at a nationwide level, you're talking well over 100 cybersecurity graduates. And if we could promote that out to the colleges around the country to let students know that these career options are available, I think that's a really positive news story that we need to be sharing as well. So I might just ask the rest of our panel to come back on for a final question that we're going to wrap up on now as well. Great, thanks very much. We're coming up to 11 o'clock, so there was a couple of questions coming in through the Q&A, but I want to just wrap up with a final question to get your perspectives around what does Ireland need to do to become a global cybersecurity industry leader. We've seen the potential that Sam has explained there from the survey that's being conducted. And we're looking at this from a startup, an SME, and a multinational perspective. So, Eoin, we might just start up with you. What do you think we need to be doing?
I think the first thing is, what does great look like here? Like, genuinely, like what is an amazing result here? And I think a good place to look at is Israel, right? Israel are probably recognized as the world leader in cybersecurity. They've raised, in the last 6 months, indigenous cybersecurity startups in Israel have raised $3.6 billion, with a B, $3.6 billion in 6 months. They have had 8 unicorns already this year, unicorn being a company at $1 billion valuation. We haven't had a single cybersecurity startup valued at $1 billion ever in Ireland, ever. In fact, Tynes will likely be the first one. So I think it's really interesting to me who in Ireland is studying the machine that Israel built around that. Because to me, on paper, that should be us, right? We've got thousands of skilled practitioners locally in Ireland who are like aren't joining startups or aren't doing startups. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, in general, I think we need to be way more ambitious. Like, to me, you know, the stat that Sam mentioned there, which is like to double over the next 10 years, that feels wildly unambitious to me. And maybe that's just like my startup head speaking, but like double in 10 years, like why aren't we talking about 10x in 10 years? Because the cybersecurity market in general, globally, is going to increase by like what, like let's say 6x in the next kind of 10 years, like 10% compounding over 10 years. And so to me, we're not even like talking about the right numbers, because even if we double in 10 years, we're still not setting ourselves up to be like a global leader. So I think focus and I think like being way more ambitious are like good places to start.
Thanks, Eoin. Pat, we might move over to you.
I think, again, to echo Owen's points, I think, you know, if you look at Israel and its success, right, it's the state as an incubator, the state as an enabler, and the state as an accelerator. So we've got the bits right, the Cyber Ireland, the coalescence of industry, academia, etc., and coming together really well. We've a compelling event that has just happened, and if you look at other countries that have had a compelling event, Estonia, etc., they've then taken that as something to create a kind of a, you know, a best-in-class approach to cybersecurity. So if we drink our own champagne nationally and echo the brand to say that Ireland, you know, treats cybersecurity seriously, is best in class. So, you know, the European capital of cybersecurity as a goal over the 10 years. And then if industry and academia get it right, I think we have the real opportunity. And an advantage we would have over some of the countries, Israel, US, etc., is our perceived neutrality. The fact that there is a benign national security apparatus here means that if cybersecurity was emanating from here, there would be no hint or suspicion that there would be backdoors or any state influence in the cybersecurity products and technologies and services that would emanate from here, which would be a huge competitive advantage.
That's great. Thanks, Pat. And Emer, from your perspective?
Sure, yeah, and I suppose I echo a lot what Eoin and Pat have said. But I think really, I suppose, in terms of the skills, like I think we're going in the right direction, but it's really like doing more of what, like targeting secondary schools, that early age, right? Because we really want to instill, I suppose, the fact that there's going to be a lot of roles in this field in the future. And I know MTU around the Cyber Academy this summer with 97 secondary schools, if I recall correctly, participating, you know, and teaching skills like networking, ethical hacking. I mean, this is what we need to be doing more of so that we can attract that talent and get them into college so that we have that strong pipeline so that we can build this out.
Thanks, Emer. So some interesting perspectives there, Sam, for maybe you to take on board for the report. I don't know, do you have any perspectives yourselves from the work that you've done in the UK?
Yeah, well, I think the main point I would sort of raise is, you know, we've been really struck by the fact that you do have really almost 500 companies operating in this space. You know, if you look at that gram for gram against other UK cities, and I know we mentioned sort of Israel and the States, but you know, that's a really, really strong number on a per capita basis. I mean, the fact that you have somewhere like Cork, a population 300,000 people, 200,000 people, and 150 cybersecurity companies or organizations in that space, I think you really can build upon that. And you know, I fully take Owen's points. You know, 15,000 doubling in 10 years, that's the trajectory, but that should be the minimum. That should absolutely be the minimum.
That's great. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their time and their contribution. Some really interesting stories there today. And we're next going to move on to a coffee break. So you'll have a chance, maybe for those of you who got the Cyber Ireland, oh, can you see it there, Cyber Ireland gift pack, to grab yourself a tea, a Barry's tea, of course, from Cork, or a coffee as well. And the next session that we have coming up is on collaborative responses to cyber attacks. And just before we move over to that, we're going to put a link in the chat now on our competition to win a virtual Capture the Flag event for your organization, which is sponsored by Technology Ireland, ICT Skillnet, and it's run by 0 Days CTF. All you need to do is fill out the form here for your organization and you'll be in with a chance to win, and we'll announce the winners of that in the closing session. So thanks again to our panel for their contributions today, and I encourage you all now to take a break and join us for session 2.